Human civilization operates within a deep structural contradiction. We have developed highly complex systems of ethics, theology, and economic theory. Yet simultaneously, the physical infrastructure that sustains us, our ecosystems, our bodies, our shared resources, is in states of severe degradation. The system is choking its own life support in the name of progress. To understand why this happens, we can look to Dr. Bichara Sahely's academic white paper on Life-Coherent Spirituality. This text builds a rigorous diagnostic framework to analyze the systemic disconnect between our stated values and our biological realities. The framework identifies a specific pathology it calls life-blind spirituality. This occurs when any value system, whether religious, economic, or political, becomes severed from embodiment, ecology, and the shared material conditions required for survival. When a system operates blindly to these biological requirements, it begins to generate structural violence. It rationalizes the degradation of human health, the contamination of water, or the collapse of communities by pointing to higher metrics, like quarterly profit margins or rigid doctrinal purity. The physical suffering is framed as a necessary cost for maintaining the abstraction. An ideology that demands the sacrifice of its own physical foundation collapses under its own logic. A system that ignores the conditions making life possible is onto-axiologically incoherent. The mechanism behind this collapse is categorized as the Great Spiritual Inversion. This is the systemic error of placing derivative concepts above the living ground from which they originated. Instead of economic or doctrinal systems serving biological needs, the hierarchy flips. The system extracts from living beings, treating them as disposable material to optimize a concept like market efficiency or institutional salvation. This structural failure applies uniformly. You can observe these exact same fractures in a corporation polluting a river to hit a growth target, a political ideology sacrificing public health to maintain power, or a religious institution demanding obedience while ignoring community poverty. The corrective to this error is what Dr. Sahely terms life-coherent spirituality. This approach refuses to abandon the physical world. It demands that abstract beliefs prove their worth by preserving and repairing actual living conditions. To prevent systems from defaulting to life blindness, we need a testable protocol. We can build this by synthesizing 4 distinct, rigorous academic lineages into a single diagnostic tool. Subjective assumptions and unexamined traditions continually fail to protect us. If we are to ensure civilizational continuity, we must now evaluate our institutions through an objective, biological, and axiological test. This diagnostic protocol relies on a 4-pillar structural derivation model. Pillar 1 is drawn from philosopher John McMurtry's life value onto-axiology. This establishes a strict baseline. Life itself is the enabling condition for all value, meaning, and knowledge. Without a living organism, no secondary value can exist. From this, we derive our central operational criterion. Every practice, belief, and institution must be tested by a single metric. Does it preserve, restore, or expand life capacity? If a hospital prioritizes billing metrics over patient recovery, or if a government subsidizes agricultural practices that destroy topsoil, the institution fails the test. It is degrading actual life to serve an abstraction. Value does not exist independently of the biosphere. Unless a system actively expands biological and social life capacity, any theoretical value it claims to hold is mathematically null. Pillar 2 integrates the system's biology of Humberto Maturana. Here, we must strip the word love of all romantic sentimentality. Biological defines love strictly as the relational domain where another being is allowed to appear as a legitimate entity in coexistence with you. It is a biological requirement for cooperation. This introduces the mechanism of structural coupling. Living organisms do not exist in a vacuum. They survive through continuous reciprocal interactions that shape both the organism and its environment over time. Human civilizations are built and conserved precisely through these ongoing processes of structural coupling and language. How we speak, build, and interact literally brings our shared world into physical existence. Biological survival is never an isolated achievement. The viability of an individual strictly depends on establishing legitimate, cooperative coexistence with the environment and other beings. Pillar 3 relies on sociologist Johan Galtung's models of conflict and structural violence. Galtung identifies a condition called false peace. This is a society where direct physical violence is absent, but the underlying systems actively silence the suffering of the vulnerable. It is quiet, but it is deeply destructive. We must aim instead for positive peace. This is the active, institutionalized presence of conditions that guarantee human life needs, like nutrition, shelter, and care, are consistently met. Under this protocol, peace is not an internal emotional state. It is the sociological, institutional embodiment of Pillar 2. It is love scaled up into infrastructure. Cultivating inward serenity while ignoring unaddressed structural violence outside your door is a symptom of life blindness. It is an escape, not a solution. The final input is Pillar 4, medical-ecological coherence. Clinical medicine and ecology show us that healing is never an entirely private event isolated within a single body. Healing is objectively defined as the successful restoration of structural coherence between a vulnerable organism and the world it inhabits. Therefore, chronic illness, burnout, and trauma are not simply personal failings or biological glitches. They are highly accurate, measurable indicators of severe miscoupling between human bodies and their environments. You cannot medicate or meditate your way out of a toxic environment. Clinical and spiritual healing remain impossible as long as the external infrastructure remains hostile to biological requirements. When we synthesize onto-axiology, structural coupling, positive peace, and ecological coherence, we generate a unified metric for civilization. This unified metric requires a physical anchor. That anchor is the civil commons. The civil commons consists of the sacred, physical vessels that fulfill our universal life requirements. It is the clean water tables, the nutrient-dense soil, the public healthcare networks, and the shared knowledge bases that allow a society to function. Structural violence directly attacks these vessels. When public resources are privatized for abstract profit or ecosystems are depleted for short-term yield, the connection between the organism and its life support is severed. We must explicitly reject the practice of spiritual bypassing, using language of mindfulness or divine plan to ignore these fractures and maintain personal comfort. The ultimate test of any value system is not its internal logic, it is its verifiable material defense of the civil commons against those who would dismantle it. To apply this theory, the framework provides an operational tool, the sevenfold grammar. The scan measures 3 parameters. First, constraint, accepting biological limits. Second, margin, building space for repair. Third, state, recognizing the physical condition of its people. The fourth parameter is disturbance. A coherent system does not ever silence protests, ignore grief, or cover up ecological collapse. It treats these disturbances as vital, incoming data signaling that a repair is required. The final stages evaluate action. Perception requires discerning what actually serves life. Regulation is the act of restoring coherence without resorting to domination. And finally, options. Is the institution successfully widening real, life-serving futures for the public? This grammar operates as a universal diagnostic. It does not require adherence to a specific religion or political party. It measures physical outputs. The validity of a government, a corporation, or a church is proven strictly by its capacity to ingest disturbance data and respond by actively expanding life-serving possibilities for the most vulnerable. The danger of the Great Inversion is that it seduces us into pursuing private transcendence while the world burns. It offers an escape from biology, but the final evolutionary requirement of this framework is that human reverence can no longer remain a private emotion. Reverence must be fully transmuted into material, relational responsibility. True spirituality is not an exit strategy. It is the disciplined, systemic restoration of the bond between the organism and the world. Apply this specific criterion to the systems you participate in. Audit your workplace, your political affiliations, and your personal ethics. Do they increase the capacity for life, or do they extract it to feed an abstraction? A civilization will endure only when it stops measuring success by derivative concepts. It will survive only when it understands that protecting its vulnerable, living ground is the single metric that matters.